Hello, in this video we're going to look how to take an input from the user using the showInputDialog method, but then convert that input from a string to an integer so we can perform some mathematical operations to that value. So I have a little program here already set up, and you should go back and look at how to take inputs using JOptionPane in the earlier video to understand this fully. If you haven't, you can go back and check that out. But if we run this, it simply says input your favorite number. And if I put 10, it says my favorite number plus 2 is 10, which is obviously wrong. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and include an assignment statement here. And I'm going to say num is equal to num plus 2. So if we run this, it says input your favorite number. I put 10, and when I hit enter, it should say your favorite number is 12, but it doesn't. It says your favorite number plus 2 is 10, 2, or 102. The reason that's happening is because if we look at the top of this program, we see that the variable num is a string. So the computer does not see that as a number you can add or subtract or multiply to. However, we can actually add strings together, and when we add strings together, we simply put those two things together, and we actually see that in our program right here. This is a string that gets printed out, and then the plus here is essentially adding this string together with this variable. So the problem in this step is that num is a string, and when I add the string 10 plus 2, it's just going to connect the 2 on the end. And so if we run this again and watch, if I put, say, 23, I get 232 now, because it's just putting the 2 on the end. So what I want to do after I've taken that input, because it's going to be interpreted as a string, is I'd like to convert that to an integer. So the first step here is I'm going to make an integer variable to hold that, and we're going to call it fav num. And for now, we'll just give that the value of 0. Be aware of the naming convention. All variables start with a lowercase, and any subsequent word is capitalized. So now, before I go through this process, what I want to do is I want to take my num value, which is a string, and convert it into an integer. And there's a built-in process to do that. And it's as follows. We're going to use an assignment statement, and we say fav num is equal to, and it turns out there's another really useful class called the integer class. Again, we know that integer is a class because it's capitalized. And if I type the word integer and put a dot, I get the listing of all the methods, and there's a specific method called parseInt. Now, to be aware at this point, I'm picking very specific methods that work in our case. Once we start really diving into classes, which is more of a grade 12 topic, we start looking at the subtleties of calling methods that are associated with classes. So we see that parseInt, if we take a look at the information, it takes a string, which we can see here as the parameter, and it returns an integer. We can also read that here. Returns an integer, takes a string. So the string I want to give this is I want to give it num. So what's happening now is whatever number the user has inputted will get passed into this method parseInt. It will get converted into an integer and then put into favorite number. So now once that's happened, I can then say favorite num is equal to favorite num plus 2. And now I can run this. So if I put what is your favorite number, and I say 10, my favorite number plus 2 is 10. So where's the problem here? So let's take a look. This is my output statement. So let's go down and take a look at that. Here's where that's outputted, and if we come across here, we see that we're outputting num still. And remember, it's fav num that we change. So I have to change this to fav num. And if we now run this, I apologize, it's gone off the screen there. If I say my favorite number is 10, it says my favorite number plus 2 is 12. One point that's interesting to note, and students sometimes will pause at, is say, well, fav num is an integer. Why is it that if I'm adding a string in an integer, what's happening there? One thing to always think about when you think about variables that aren't the same type is that when we add them together, Java will automatically make some assumptions. And one of those assumptions is that when we add a string to an integer, it automatically converts that integer into a string for output purposes. So to sum up, this video is looking how to use showInputDialog to take integer inputs. One of the challenges is that showInputDialog returns a string. So what has to happen is that this line right here where we take the input, it's going to give you a string even if you type in a number. So in order to do some mathematical operations to that number, we need to convert that string variable into an integer. And that's what we do right here. It turns out the integer class, which we can define, we can see this is a class because it's capitalized, has a built-in method called parseInt, which takes an integer value, it takes a string value, and we can see here, it accepts a string as a parameter, and it returns an integer. So it takes a string, so provided that string is a number, it's going to convert that into an integer and return it, which we then place into favenum. Remember, this line is called an assignment statement. When we read an assignment statement, we always look at the right side first and figure out what that's going to do, and then whatever the result is gets put into whatever variable is on the left-hand side. So then once we've converted num into an integer and we put it into favenum, we can then perform our mathematical operation and output that to the screen. So if I run this program and I put in 120, let's put in a really big number, 12,234, 12,234 plus 2 is 12,236. I hope that helped. Good luck.